The scream echoed across the square like thunder in a clear sky. "Leave that child alone!" The woman's voice, filled with panic and anger, cut through the quiet murmur of passers-by like an invisible blade. In the center of that small chaos, a scene unfolded too quickly to be understood. A desperate mother, her eyes wide with fear, pulled her 5-year-old son away from an old man in simple clothes and a crumpled military cap, as if she was saving him from an invisible danger. The square, which seconds before breathed peace and innocence, now seemed to suffocate under the heavy tension that hung in the air. People stopped, whispered, took out cell phones to film something they didn't even understand. Some faces showed indignation, others just curiosity, but everyone without exception judged, without asking, without understanding. The old man remained still, unshakable. His gaze, heavy as time itself, was fixed on the ground with an expression that mixed sadness and resignation. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to justify himself. He just held his cap to his chest with a firmness that said more than any words could express. Have you ever felt the weight of being judged without even having the chance to explain? If so, you know exactly how that silent man felt at that moment. The mother, still overcome with fear, pointed with a trembling finger, accusing him loudly. She screamed about threat, about danger, about protecting her son. And her every word was like a sentence handed down, without the right to defend herself. The old man did not resist, did not confront, did not express any signs of anger. He just stood there with his silent and dignified posture, while the looks around him turned into invisible arrows stuck in his tired heart. In the midst of that emotional storm, there was something different about the man that few seemed to notice. Something that went beyond the worn-out clothes, beyond the scruffy beard, beyond the fragile appearance. It was something that shone in his straight posture, in the way he held his cap to his chest, in the way he faced public shame without looking away. It was what many call silent strength. The silent strength of those who have faced battles much greater than the prejudice of any given afternoon. What you discover now may surprise you. Because not everything is what it seems. Sometimes, the real threat doesn't come from who we think is strange, but from our inability to see beyond appearances. That mother, like so many others there, had no idea who was in front of her. I didn't know about the history that old man carried in his eyes, nor about the sacrifices buried in his memory, protected only by the thin line of honor and respect. The wind continued to blow lightly, but the atmosphere in the square was stormy. The frightened child clung to his mother, while the old man, with an almost supernatural dignity, seemed to carry on his shoulders not only the weight of that unfair moment, but also that of a lifetime of forgotten battles. And it was exactly there, in this silence full of meanings, that a small clue began to emerge. Something that could completely change the way everyone there saw that man. Something that would transform fear into gratitude, and judgment into respect. Now I want to take you even deeper into this story, because what comes next will reveal truths that few have the eyes to see. The policeman, upon arriving, brought with him not only the authority of the law, but also the weight of further suspicion on the old man's shoulders. People made way, some with disapproving looks, others eager for an easy show. The veteran, still motionless, only stretched out his trembling hand to hand over an aged document, its edges worn like the memories he carried in his chest. The agent, upon receiving the paper, gave him a quick, cold look, as if he had already judged before understanding. The wind ruffled the old man's few white hairs, while he kept his eyes down, like someone who had already been judged too many times in life. His every movement was slow, heavy, carrying a dignity that had no place in that scenario of injustice. On his worn coat, embroidered almost invisible on the pocket, rested a small golden badge, a symbol of service, of sacrifice, of freedom won with pain. But there, in front of that crowd, it seemed to be worth absolutely nothing. Can you imagine what it's like to be treated like a threat when all you have left is memory and longing? Maybe you've already been through something similar, or maybe you know someone who struggles with invisible battles every day. If this story touches your heart in any way, write it here in the comments. I would love to know how you see these situations. It is through your voice that we build a community that values what really matters: respect, empathy, and honor. And if you believe that the world needs more stories like this, stories that rescue forgotten values, don't forget to leave a like. It may seem like a small gesture, but it makes a huge difference in reaching more people with this message. Oh, and if you want to continue following these stories that move, inspire, and make us reflect on who the true heroes really are, subscribe to the channel. Your presence here is the force that keeps this mission of spreading hope, respect, and faith alive in a world that so often forgets to look at those who most deserve to be remembered. The police officer was still interrogating the old man with quick and suspicious questions, as if the simplicity of his answers were reason enough to be more suspicious. The mother, now holding her son's hand tightly, kept her distance, but her eyes, previously inflamed with fear, began to hesitate. There was something about that scene that didn't quite fit. It wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't say. That's what his eyes carried. That was what his silence screamed to anyone with the sensitivity to listen. And it was then, amidst the hubbub of the square and the weight of silent accusations, that a small clue, almost imperceptible, began to emerge. Something that, if looked at carefully, would have the power to turn that whole story upside down. The sound of hurried footsteps, distant sirens, and excited voices seemed to mix into a single bitter melody in that square. The crowd was already thick enough to form a wall around the scene, stifling any chance of true understanding. Every face was a mirror of judgment, every look an anticipated sentence. The mother, still panting, held on to her son as if he were one step away from being ripped from her arms. Her eyes, inflamed with emotion, could see nothing more than the fear she herself had created. He pointed his finger at the old man, his words piercing the air like spears, sharpened by ignorance and panic. "He tried to touch my son!" she screamed. "Call the police! This man is dangerous!" And there he was, the veteran, face furrowed by deep wrinkles, as if each line on his skin told a story that no one wanted to hear. His calloused hands pressed his cap against his chest as if it were his last shield, his last anchor in the face of the storm brewing around him. There was not a single word in his defense, no aggressive gestures, no response crossed. Just tired eyes, filled with a pain as old as the wars he carried in his memory. The tension grew. Every second of the old man's silence seemed to irritate the crowd even more, who, without realizing it, were feeding a cruel kind of thirst for the guilty. Someone filmed closely, looking for angles that reinforced the drama. Others commented, whispered invented stories that spread like wildfire. "He must be a crazy old man," they said. It's not normal for an old man alone, looking at children. No proof, no attempt to listen. Just hasty conclusions, lulled by invisible prejudices. The police officer, upon arriving, did not bring the expected relief. Their presence only intensified the oppression. Rigid, suspicious, he approached the old man firmly, as if he were facing a dangerous criminal. "Identity," he demanded. The veteran, with slow and painful movements, took an almost torn-apart document from the inside pocket of his jacket. It was like watching someone offering the last crumbs of dignity they had left. While the agent checked the papers with suspicious eyes, the mother tried to relate, between sobs and anger, a confusing story, made up of misinterpretations and terrified assumptions. And the old man? The old man just remained there, motionless, silently absorbing each accusation, as if it were another invisible bullet passing through his soul, already scarred by so many battles. It was impossible not to feel the crushing weight of that injustice, that public coldness that hurt much more than any weapon of war. The wind insisted on blowing, bringing the sweet smell of the trees and the distant aroma of popcorn from a street vendor. It was an afternoon that, for anyone else, would have been ordinary. For the old man, it was another painful page written in the invisible book of the forgotten. Every harsh word thrown at him seemed to echo within himself, reliving all the moments he was discarded, ignored, forgotten by a society that promised freedom, but delivered loneliness. Between one murmur and another, some began to question. Was that really it? But they were timid voices, drowned out by the collective force of the judgment. Who would dare defend a strange old man against a mother's distressed words? The dominant mentality was one of fear, and in it, the veteran was nothing more than a walking threat, a disconnected shadow of what had once been a symbol of honor and freedom. Have you ever noticed how it is often easier to believe what scares you than to seek the hidden truth behind appearances? In moments like these, the transformation of a story depends on a single decision: looking beyond fear. The police officer, still finding no real reason to arrest the old man, tried to convince him to leave for his own good. It was a veiled humiliation, a request disguised as an order to disappear from the sight of those who, in truth, were ashamed of their own injustice. The shame that they had not yet recognized, but that would inevitably come. The veteran, with the same painful calm, put his worn cap back on his head, adjusting it like a soldier who, even defeated, still honors his invisible uniform. In his eyes, there was no anger. There was no hate. There was just a deep sadness. The sadness of those who sacrificed everything in the name of values like freedom and honor, and was now treated as an inconvenient burden. If you've made it this far, I wanted to ask you something. Comment below with the phrase, "I see beyond appearances." It will be incredible to see how many people can also see with their hearts, and not just with their eyes. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because something in that square still needed to be revealed, something that carried a much greater weight than anyone there could imagine. The policeman didn't even need to insist. Before the complete words had left his mouth, the old man was already holding out, with his hands marked by time, a document as worn out as the hope he carried in his chest. It was a silent gesture of respect, of obedience, but also of profound humiliation. The wallet trembled slightly between his fingers, and it wasn't just because of his age. It was from the weight of injustice, from the biting cold of being seen as a danger, when all he had ever been was a protector. The agent took the document almost mechanically, like someone receiving a worthless piece of paper. He looked, checked, frowned. The crowd advanced with their eyes, hungry for an outcome that would justify their own evil disguised as zeal. All around, the trees swayed their leaves in the warm afternoon wind, indifferent to the human tragedy that was happening there. The veteran stood still, cap in hand, head slightly bowed. I didn't say anything. He didn't complain. He didn't protest. He simply endured in silence every second of that public martyrdom. His presence was almost like a rock in the middle of the river, firm, unshakable, even though he was constantly buffeted by the currents of ignorance and prejudice. That was the essence of silent strength. The silent strength that didn't need screams to prove its greatness. "I was just watching," he said, his voice husky, almost a whisper. It was just a memory. A good memory. Simple words, but they fell to the ground in the square like dead leaves, unnoticed, trampled by the cruel haste of the judges. No one seemed to really listen. They were all too busy trying to protect their fragile certainties to see the hidden truth that was unfolding before their eyes. The agent, finding no solid reason to accuse him, exchanged quick glances with the mother, who now seemed less firm, less convinced, but still unable to back down publicly. The child, who until then had been whimpering while clinging to his mother's legs, peered at the old man through his fingers, with that pure curiosity that only children can still maintain, before the world teaches them to judge before understanding. Every second that passed was like a blade cutting deeper into that man's dignity. People continued to film. Evil whispers grew louder. Some expressions brought disguised pleasure on their faces, the dark pleasure of witnessing someone's fall, without even knowing who they really were. The mass mentality was relentless. When someone is branded a villain, few have the courage to look behind the scenes, to seek the true story behind the mask imposed by collective ignorance. The old man's clothes looked even more shabby in the harsh afternoon light. His jacket, once a symbol of bravery, was now just worn fabric covering invisible scars. The cap, which discreetly bore a military service insignia, seemed too heavy for his hands. But he wouldn't let go. It was his last link to a time when he was still seen as a hero. not a threat. Meanwhile, the questions continued. Why were you there? Why were you looking at the child? Each question was a masked accusation, an open wound, a desperate attempt to find guilt where there was only longing. It was like hitting a mirror and accusing it of reflecting the world's own ugliness. His answer never changed. No stuttering, no running away. It was just a good memory. And these few words, spoken with an almost painful tenderness, carried the weight of old battles, of losses that time has never healed. Because that boy who played in the square, free and innocent, reminded the old man of another child. One he had lost many years ago, in a brutal accident, shortly after returning from a war that left him alive on the outside, but destroyed on the inside. That memory was all he had, and seeing that scene, even from afar, was like touching, for a brief moment, something that life had stolen forever. But no one there knew that. No one cared to ask. They just saw an old man, alone, strange. And they decided he was guilty, because it was easier to believe that than to face the transformation that such a painful truth would bring to their own sleeping consciences. Have you ever noticed how sometimes a wrong decision made in seconds can have an impact that lasts forever? Choosing to believe appearances, ignoring context, turning a blind eye to the subtext. All of this shapes the world we build and perpetuates silent injustices that lurk in the corners of life. The agent, given the absence of a real crime, suggested that the veteran leave the square to avoid bigger problems. It was an order disguised as advice. It was easier to remove the old man than to confront the crowd's own collective guilt. And, once again, he obeyed. No fighting. Without raising your voice. He picked up his cap and placed it back on his head with slow, reverent movements, as if he were preparing for a last solitary march. He took a few steps, heavy as lead, crossing the square under the eyes of dozens of strangers who followed him with suspicion, shame, or indifference. Each step was like crossing a minefield of painful memories, invisible explosions that only he felt. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what was yet to be revealed that day had the power to forever transform not only that story, but also the mentality of everyone who witnessed it. If you feel that you are able to see beyond appearances, comment below. I choose to see the truth. The old man walked slowly, as if each step carried with him an invisible current made of painful memories. The worn cap still rested against his chest, like a silent shield between him and the world that condemned him without even trying to understand him. The police officer, unaware of the weight of the scene before him, took the cap from the veteran's hands to inspect it. As he slowly unwound the rough fabric, he saw something almost invisible to ordinary eyes. A small golden insignia, discreetly sewn onto the inner flap. It wasn't just any decoration. It was a sacred symbol to those who understood its true meaning. The mark of a decorated Vietnam War veteran, someone who had faced hell on earth and returned home with only what was left of himself. The cap, now in the policeman's hands, seemed to tell a silent story. Every faded line, every loose stitch in the fabric was like an open scar, a silent testament to sacrifice, courage, and loss. But there, amid curious eyes and indiscreet cameras, no one seemed ready to see beyond the surface. The old man, seeing his cap being handled like a worthless object, looked down at the ground. His eyes were filled with a dense sadness, as deep as a bottomless pit. It was as if every memory of that time came back, one after another, crushing his chest with the weight of what had been lost. Not just friends, battles, or pieces of himself, but the very respect they once swore he would never lack. Inside the threadbare pocket of his jacket, another clue discreetly rested. A medal, dented by time and neglect, shone timidly in the grey afternoon light. There was no luxury in it, just history. A story that spoke of sleepless nights, of impossible missions, of brothers in uniform who were left behind in the humid and silent jungles of a distant country. The mother, still holding onto her son, began to look more closely. Something didn't fit. The blind rage that had dominated her was gradually giving way to a restlessness that was difficult to ignore. The old man no longer looked threatening. He didn't behave like someone guilty. He didn't look for excuses. He didn't try to explain himself. It just existed there, like a rock, bearing the brunt of a storm it never asked for. His silence spoke louder than any scream of indignation. It was a silence full of hidden truths, full of invisible pain. And maybe, just maybe, it would begin to whisper into the consciences of those watching. Perhaps a first thread of doubt began to curl around the mother's hardened heart, like a crack in a wall built hastily by fear. While the policeman returned the cap with a hasty gesture, trying to end that uncomfortable episode, the old man received it with both hands, like someone picking up a sacred heirloom that had fallen on the ground. His calloused fingers caressed the small golden badge for a brief moment, before returning the cap to his head with a respect that seemed completely out of place in this environment of contempt and ignorance. There, in that random square, in front of a random crowd, a true hero was humiliated without resistance. Not out of weakness, but for discipline, for honor, for understanding that sometimes true strength lies in standing firm while the world falls apart around you. Discipline over violence. Silent strength. The veteran did not ask for respect. It did not require recognition. His mere existence, his firm stance, and his silent dignity were more powerful than any defense could have been. But the world, so used to kneeling before shouts and bravado, was blind to the true greatness that was hidden in the little things, in the almost invisible details, in the battles fought in silence. Have you ever stopped to think about how many stories like this go unnoticed every day? How many heroes walk alongside us, invisible, while rush and prejudice prevent us from seeing the truth hidden before us? The transformation begins when we decide to see. When we choose to listen to what silence has to say. When we stop judging by appearances and start looking for the essence. The mother, now silent, pulled her son closer, no longer in desperate protection, but as if seeking shelter from the guilt that was beginning to emerge in her chest. She still didn't know the whole story, but something inside her was already beginning to change. A small seed of doubt, of shame, of the desire to understand. And perhaps it was this small crack in the armor of judgment that could later on pave the way for a true transformation of mentality, for a revelation capable of impacting not only her life, but that of everyone who witnessed that moment. Because every great change begins like this, with discomfort, with doubt, with the courage to look at what has always been before our eyes, but has never really been seen. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because what was yet to be revealed carried such a powerful force that it would be impossible to remain indifferent. If you believe that true greatness lies in the invisible details, comment below. I see beyond the obvious. The confusion was beginning to dissipate like fog that slowly dissipates with the first rays of sunlight, but the damage was already done. The veteran walked to the wooden bench in the corner of the square, his steps dragging as if each meter covered was a small battle won against the pain, against the humiliation, against the silent abandonment that now seemed to weigh more than ever on his back. The bench was worn, with old cracks and rusty nails sticking out of the wood. Still, he sat down with the same reverence as a soldier takes his stand before his flag. With a slow, almost ceremonial gesture, the old man reached into the inside pocket of his faded jacket. His fingers, calloused and trembling, found something folded, kept with a care that is only reserved for what is most precious. It was a photograph. Small, yellowed with age, so thin it looked like it could fall apart at any second. He unfolded it with the delicacy of someone touching a sacred relic. And there, between the marks of time, an image appeared that spoke louder than any scream. A young man, in his combat uniform, holding a little girl in his arms. The child's smile was an explosion of purity, in contrast to the soldier's already tired look, as if even in that tender moment he knew that life was brief, and happiness fleeting. The veteran looked at that photograph for long seconds, as if trying to absorb every detail before the pain made everything unbearable. His eyes, which had endured horrors few would dare imagine, now glistened with tears he would not allow to fall. The boy who had been playing in the square minutes before, the boy who had caused all the chaos, was eerily similar to the daughter he had lost years ago. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't malice. It was just longing. A longing so sharp, so alive, that it seemed capable of tearing one's own chest. A desperate attempt to relive, even if for a few seconds, a love that time and tragedy had mercilessly ripped from him. The imaginary camera would slowly approach the old man's face, focusing on the moist eyes, the skin marked by the sun and suffering, the trembling lips that whispered something inaudible, perhaps an apology to a ghost that never abandoned him. In the background, the American flag fluttered slowly, as if it were the only silent witness to the real battle taking place there. The wind played with the edge of the photograph, and he held it tighter, as if holding on to the last connection with something that was lost a long time ago. It was a behind-the-scenes moment in life, a hidden truth that would never appear on cell phone videos, or in the quick conversations that crowd would later have to justify their own hasty judgments. And while the old man held that small window to the past, the world around him continued indifferently, each person returning to their routine, their urgencies, their distractions. Few, very few, stopped to really look, to see, to feel. It was impossible not to wonder, how many times in life do we fail to see the essentials behind appearances? How many decisions do we make without knowing the profound impact they have? How many transformations could we experience if, instead of judging, we simply listened to what silence has to say? The old man slowly passed his thumb over his daughter's face in the photograph, as if he could, with that gentle touch, cross time, rescue his lost innocence, forgive himself for the wars he won on. The battlefield, but lost in his heart. His journey was never about medals or glory. It was always about keeping alive what really mattered: love, honor, faith. The square seemed to rotate in slow motion around that frozen instant. Children ran, vendors screamed, people fussed, but everything seemed distant to him. Because at that moment, what mattered was just that memory, that connection, that piece of soul that the world had already forgotten. The suffering did not come from recent injustice. It came from the sum of all the abandonments, all the broken promises, all the beloved faces that were left behind, in war, in life, in time. And yet, there he was, whole, dignified, with his chest open to be heard again if necessary, because that was the essence of true heroes. It was impossible to look at that scene and not feel the weight of the invisible history we carry on our shoulders, the impact of the silent choices we make every day, the echo of the truths we prefer to ignore for fear of facing our own weakness. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is something inside that photograph that no one there could imagine, and that, once revealed, would forever change the way everyone saw that old man. If this story is also touching you, comment below. I feel this pain too. The mother watched from afar. Her racing heart no longer knew if it was beating out of fear or shame. The boy, now in his lap, seemed more curious than scared, looking at the old man with wide, attentive eyes, as if he instinctively felt the difference between threat and longing. That man did not smell of evil. It smelled of loss, of absence, of time that drags on too heavy for those who have carried invisible burdens their entire lives. With the photograph still in his hands, the old man breathed with difficulty, as if each inspiration was a silent battle against the memories that wanted to invade and bring him down right there, in that square, before eyes that until a few minutes ago had condemned him mercilessly. The breeze blew gently, playing with the dry leaves that swirled across the cracked ground. But within him, an endless storm was devastating everything that was left standing. The mother, overcome with unexpected courage, slowly released her son's hand and stood up. His steps were hesitant, like someone walking on sacred ground, fearing to desecrate something he no longer understood. Her every step seemed to echo in the void between them. A void made not of physical distance, but of years, of prejudices, of wounds opened by ignorance and fear. She stopped in front of the veteran, who just looked up, surprised but still serene. There was no bitterness there, no regrets. Just a tiredness so deep it seemed to be part of the very structure of his bones. The photograph trembled in his calloused hands, not from the wind, but from the weight of decades of memories that insisted on bleeding, even so much later. Mom knelt down. Not out of obligation, not due to theatrical fault, but because his heart had finally understood the hidden truth that his eyes refused to see. He knelt down like someone who recognizes an altar, like someone who understands that he is before something bigger than himself, before a story of sacrifice, of honor, of freedom achieved at the cost of tears that no one else wanted to remember. She reached out and held his hands, rough, cold, fragile, but charged with an invisible force, so immense that it seemed to radiate a silent light around them. She raised her teary eyes and, with a choked voice, said the only words that could be said at that moment: "Forgive me, and thank you." The old man did not respond with words. It didn't even need to. His smile was light, almost imperceptible, but so full of meaning that it could have toppled entire walls. He, with the delicacy of someone who blesses what is purest, placed his trembling hand on the boy's head. A small gesture, but filled with such profound energy that it seemed as if, at that exact moment, something was being fixed in the world. The crowd, once noisy and merciless, now stood in reverent silence. A heavy silence, full of shame, of belated respect, of contained tears. Each look was a silent confession. We were wrong. We judge wrong. We were blind. We didn't see what was right in front of us. The American flag in the background continued to wave with the same solemn slowness, as if it also revered that moment. The sunset colored the sky with golden and reddish tones, casting long shadows over the square. Everything seemed to conspire to transform that moment into something eternal, carved in time like a scar of learning and transformation. The decisions made in seconds, the hasty judgment, the condemnation without listening. Everything now weighed on consciences like lead. The veteran, without saying a single word, had taught everyone there a lesson about true strength, about discipline without violence, about mercy without humiliation. Every wrinkle on his face was a page in a story that no one wanted to read. Each restrained glance was a silent letter sent to a world that would rather forget who truly built the freedom it enjoys. Every careful movement, every dignified gesture was a living reminder that real heroes, they don't shout, they don't demand, they just live. And they let their own journey speak for them. The mother hugged her son to her chest and, with her eyes closed, felt for the first time the true weight of gratitude. Not the common, mechanical gratitude, but the one that comes from the gut, that rips through the chest and fills the soul with a reverence that is impossible to explain in words. It was as if, in that hug, she was, in some way, asking for forgiveness not only for herself, but for everyone who, like her, had forgotten the value of what really matters. The old man stood up slowly, the photograph still clutched between his fingers. His gaze swept the square one last time, not with bitterness, but with a resigned melancholy. He knew that the battle he fought every day was invisible, that there would be no applause, no medals. But he also knew that all it took was a sincere look, a silent bow, to make all his struggle worth it. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is something that few people realized at that moment, something that would further reveal the true power of compassion and forgiveness. If you feel that something inside you has changed listening to this story, comment below. I believe in the power of mercy. The square, now silent, looked like an abandoned stage after a play that no one really understood. People began to disperse, walking at a slow pace, as if they were carrying a weight that they could not explain. The veteran remained there, standing, holding the faded photograph as if holding his own exposed heart. Every line on his face was an untold story. Every fold of her clothes carried memories that would never fit into common words. He didn't need speeches to prove who he was. I didn't need applause. Its existence was, in itself, the greatest declaration of honor that anyone could do. How many people there would have the courage to live half of what he lived? How many could bear to lose friends in distant fields, face hopeless nights, carry on their shoulders the responsibility of fighting for freedom of people who one day would forget their names? The veteran knew that his true legacy was not medals or honors. It was the freedom of seeing a child run freely in a square, without fear, without war. Even if this freedom came at the cost of oblivion itself, the dry leaves danced around him like little messengers of the weather, blowing a melancholy symphony that only attentive ears could hear. The sky, dyed a deep orange, seemed to silently witness that life lesson. The lesson that true heroes are not made of grand gestures, but of small daily resistances against hopelessness. In a world so quick to point fingers, so quick to condemn without knowing, so comfortable in forgetting those who paved the way with blood and tears, that old man's stance was a fierce reminder. Honor is not demanded. It is earned through sacrifice. No respect is required. It is conquered, slowly, painfully, often without anyone looking. And there, in the middle of that forgotten square, a mother and her son learned something that no history book could teach. They learned that the hero is not always the one who arrives with fanfare. Sometimes he comes silent, hurt, carrying the weight of invisible battles in his eyes. And the most powerful form of recognition you can offer him is not a pat on the back or an empty word. It's a sincere look. It is a gesture of gratitude that comes from the soul. The veteran placed the photograph back in his pocket, arranging it with the same care as someone who keeps a treasure that no one values anymore. Then he pulled his cap forward, shading his eyes, and gave the mother and the boy a little nod. A simple gesture, but filled with a nobility that transcended any logical explanation. The boy, in his pure innocence, responded with a shy smile and a wave of his hand. A small gesture, but one that carried within it the potential for healing, transformation, and hope. Perhaps in that brief moment, two distant generations had connected through what really matters. Respect, empathy, recognition. As the old man walked away, with slow but steady steps, it seemed as if he carried with him all the weight of a generation that learned to be strong in silence. And as he disappeared down the deserted street, the flag in the background continued to wave softly, as if saying in an almost sacred whisper, "God bless those who fought for freedom." May we never forget the silent battles that allowed us to live our days in peace. Sometimes true power is standing when everyone expects you to fall. In offering mercy where it would be easy to retaliate with spite. In blessing those who humiliated you. Silent strength is greater than shouted accusations. True power is not shouting louder. It's keeping your dignity intact when everything around you seems to be falling apart. That afternoon's hero did not leave with applause. He didn't make the headlines. He left as he came, in silence. But it left behind an invisible trail, a discreet transformation that planted deep roots in the souls of those who had the courage to really look. A transformation that would change mentalities, that would tear veils of judgment, that would scatter seeds of compassion wherever the wind could carry it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is something that few still understand. The true legacy of these silent heroes is not what is visible to the eyes. It's what slowly germinates within us and changes forever the way we choose to see the world. If this story touched something inside your heart, comment below. I honor the invisible heroes. Some battles leave no visible marks. They don't wear medals on their chests, nor do they make pages in history books. But they are fought every day, in silence, in discipline, in the unshakable faith of those who chose, way back then, to carry the weight of freedom so that others could walk free today. The old man in that square was not defeated. On the contrary, he won the hard way. He stood tall in the face of injustice. Not because he was insensitive, but because he understood that true strength is not measured by the power to attack, but by the ability to resist without losing dignity. In a world where it is easy to judge and difficult to understand, he left us a silent, but powerful Tiwi's message. Honor is lived, not claimed. Respect is not required. it builds. And faith, this invisible flame, is what keeps alive those who, even invisible to the eyes of the world, change everything around them. If you've made it this far, it's because this story also found a place there. So, take advantage and leave your like. Not out of obligation, but because this gesture shows that there are still people who see the value of things that really matter. And if this type of content spoke to you, if you feel that these stories of honor, transformation, and hidden truth need to be preserved, subscribe to the channel here. I really want to walk with you on this journey of rescuing what time and haste try to erase. To mark that you stayed until the end, comment below. I walk alongside the invisible heroes. It will be amazing to see who really feels this special connection. And if you want to continue immersing yourself in this atmosphere of silent strength and stories that touch the soul, there's a video here that complements everything we experience today. Click and come with me. The journey is just beginning.